Greetings and welcome to Fresh Fire International Ministries. This is our Wisdom Wednesday inspirational message for you. And this week's title is The Child Can't Be a Royal Priest. And the subtitle would be Embracing Mature Holiness. I'm Pastor Janice Fareed Hardy. I want to tell you, start out with a true story, very true story. There were two grandmothers who were basically in the same family and they lived in the same town, but they had very different approaches, let's say. Now, grandmother number one was dedicated to helping people. She had a heart for people, okay? And grandmother number two was known for her entertaining jokes, her entertaining, witty jokes that carried life lessons in them. Now, despite their different approaches, both of these women were blessings to the community. Grandmother number one decided saw a need in the community, and so what she did in her creative, innovative, entrepreneurial mind, she set up, I guess, a store. Okay, and I use that word loosely, but for that area, for that day and time, it was indeed a store. She had a shack on her property, and so she opened opened up a store, set up a couple of shelves, had some shelves set up in there, and somehow, no one knows how she did it, but she would get cornmeal, she would get flour, she would get sugar, salt, she would get some of the staples that the area would need, and she would put them in her store. And that was great. Grand opening, woo, wonderful. And as the clients, everybody knew her, so they would come to her store to get things. If she had not opened that store at that time, they would have to find a way to get into town, which could be expensive, okay, and take time. And they would have to pay more in those stores than this grandmother number one would be charging them. So it would be a burden to them. So she was indeed a blessing as she went along. She knew everyone in the community in that area, so she knew some people could not afford her staples. So she wound up just giving them away, giving it to them. And there were other people who could afford them, but not at the very moment. So she would allow them to get it on credit. And so credit meant that she would write their names in her book and the date that they promised to pay. And that's how she was operating her store. No, she was giving some away, and some others were getting on, buying it on credit, and a few, were paying her, discounted price. But the ones who were buying it on credit, somehow their tally or their tab or their credit bill kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger as they would promise, oh, I'll pay you next week. Oh, yeah, oh, I'm a little short today. I'll pay you next week. And this went on for a while, but this grandmother kept running her store, kept getting her supplies from wherever or however she got them. But over time, it became really burdensome for her, even though she saw the need. It was burdensome for her, and she wound up having to close that store. But the closure, despite the closure, this was groundbreaking in that area in the 1950s. What this woman did was amazing, absolutely amazing, okay? And it just showed her compassion, okay? Her compassion for her community, but it couldn't be sustained. Grandmother number two had a different approach to life. She would, tell a lot of jokes, but as I said, her jokes had life meaning for them. Okay, people were laughing and they were also learning. And let me tell you one of her jokes as an example. Okay, she said she would tell people, "I was kicked out of school. I don't know if you know it, but I was kicked out of school." They say, "Oh, how? What happened?" And she would begin her story. That was her opening. She was also somewhat of an actress too, so she would demonstrate it. She said, I went to kindergarten. First day of kindergarten, okay, everything was going great, great. Learning things, some things I knew, it was wonderful, fantastic. And then the teacher let us all out to recess. Okay, everybody had to go in the yard for recess. So some kids were playing, some, jacks, jump rope, all the things they would do in that day and time in the 1950s. But she went and sat under a shade tree. She sat under a tree by herself. And so the teacher saw her sitting alone and came over and asked, are you sick? No, ma'am. Okay. Are you shy? No, ma'am. Okay. What's going on? Why are you sitting over here by yourself? And so the 5-year-old version of this grandmother, said, "You know something? I don't do recess. Well, why not? Because I don't play. I don't play." So she said, for that, they kicked me out of kindergarten at a right away, starting school. I was kicked out of kindergarten. By this time, whoever was listening to this story, this joke, would be on the floor laughing, rolling. But I'll tell you something. That joke, as many of her jokes, they were a reflection of how she lived her life. She really didn't play. She was kind, she was caring, and all of that. But she would look at the practical side of things, okay? She would pray them through, and she would also look at what they could do practically, all right? And so she had what we might call a lot of common sense, okay? She didn't have educated sense. In fact, neither did grandmother one nor grandmother number two. But grandmother number two had common sense and that mindset. She was mature. She had a mature mindset about how to face issues in life. And she helped with that mindset. She helped many people to navigate through issues that they were facing. Now, both of these women were Christians, okay? But this is how they lived out their faith. This is how they lived out, if you want to call it, even though I know it's a dirty word today in the church, but this is how they lived out their holiness. And don't run away before I tell you, let me describe holiness, what I'm talking about right here, right now, okay? Grandmother number one's, her heart was commendable, but her lack of maturity in sustaining the efforts she was making in her holiness had no great impact on the community. Grandmother number two, with her more mature approach to life, she had maturity. And that maturity, it is absolutely essential in following Christ. How many times in the Bible do we read, and Paul was so well known for telling people, yeah, you're still on the milk when you should be on meat right now. When are you gonna stop acting like a baby? Even though you love the Lord, your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, but you've got to mature. Okay. And again, both women were beautiful Christians, an asset to their community. But let me tell you what I mean by holiness. I'm going back to the old meaning of holiness that's in the original languages, the Hebrew and the Greek. And part of what it meant in that day and that time, it just meant that you were set apart for God's use. It meant that you realize that you were created in God's image and God is holy, okay? From Revelation, from I guess Genesis to Revelation, God says he is holy. So if he can say that about himself, it works for me. And we are created in his image. We're not perfect, but there is an understanding that we're not like the rest of the world. We don't do things like the rest of the world, okay? We really are set apart for God's use. We are holy, okay? Holy, all right? It's not about appearance, as you would know, but it's about reflecting God's image, okay? In a real, not one of these flaky, but in a real way. It means we are in our holiness. We are approachable. And it's not just not just a slogan that we throw out, and it's not just, you know, I love tambourines. Can't play them, but I love them. But it's not just banging on the tambourine. It's actually how we live our life wherever we are, not just in church, but wherever we are. We are set apart, and we know we are set apart. All right, we're carrying God's name. Okay, if you want to say that. So if we find in the way that we're living out our holiness that people are running from us, that's a problem. You know why? Because people did not run from Jesus. They ran to him. They wanted to be around him. And so if we find that our holiness, that if our being set apart is chasing people from us, and God knows they don't want to come to our church if we're so holy because we're going to look down on them, that's the problem. That's not what Jesus did. I don't know who you're following, but hello. That's not what Jesus did. Okay, so I'm talking about real holiness, the way that The original writers of the Bible, Old Testament and New, spoke about it. How can we evangelize if nobody wants to be around us? I mean, really, in fact, before I was a Christian, that's one of the things that kept me away from Christianity. I'm like, I don't want to be like that. But no, we're talking about here mature holiness. Okay, we're not talking about compromising with the world. There is no compromising, but there is a way. Jesus was in the world, but not of it. So if we are images of Jesus Christ. We too can do what he did. Holiness, the real holiness, can operate in the world and not become contaminated by it. I mean, you know that well known example. If you go into a room and you flip on the light switch, well, then that light overpowers, it overcomes the darkness in that room. Okay. That's what a holiness is. When we walk into a room, we don't have to go around saying, having uh, you know, a sign saying I'm a Christian, people will know because our light, our holiness will shine through because it's coming from the inside, coming to the outside. Okay, it's not just a matter of being saved. Yes, hallelujah, we're saved. But there must be a maturity. There must be a maturity that comes along with that salvation, especially as we grow, as we live in the Lord. Okay, we demonstrate the light. And I love the way that, before I even get to that, I just want to emphasize once again, it's not that we're perfect. Please, I'm not, you know that, and I'm certainly not promoting that, but we are moving higher and higher in holiness. And holiness is not just a destination, it is a constant growing in the Lord. And if we make a mistake, or when we make a mistake, then we, being holy, we are willing to repent. We're willing to ask God for forgiveness. And then we're willing to make a U turn to get back on God's path. That is holiness because we are set apart. We are set apart. Mature holiness, once again, means you know who you are, okay? And you're continually learning more about God and continually learning as you learn more about God. God is showing you more of who you are, okay? Who you really, really are. Grandmother, and I'm not being critical, okay? I'm just being truthful. Grandmother number one, no doubt, was a wonderful, amazing woman. However, she seemed to think that she was a doormat for the world. Her life seemed to show that she thought that she was here to be taken advantage of by people. That is not maturity. That is totally confused holiness. Confused holiness. Say name, name written in the Lamb's Book of Life, going to heaven, but you are confused in your holiness. Yes, we are here to serve others, but never are we to let them continually stump us into the ground. I mean, how does that reflect the holy God? God didn't let it happen, okay? So who are we? We're not doormats. We're not arrogant know it alls, but God has given us brains to think and to innovate and to worship Him and to love and serve others. Okay. Peter said, in a sense, he said, the world does this, the world does that. But I'm quoting First Peter 2:19. But you are chosen. You are a chosen generation. Okay, you are a royal priesthood. You are a holy people. You are His. You are God's own special people, so that you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. It takes mature holiness to reflect out God's light. So let's be spiritual, okay? And let's be practical in embracing our mature holiness. Let's reflect on our actions and examine if our actions and ideas reflect both God's kindness and God's wisdom. Okay? Let's seek maturity in faith. Strive for a mature understanding and application of our beliefs, a mature understanding of Jesus' teachings. And by the way, that does not that doesn't really happen on continuous isolation where you've got your private interpretations where you're just studying the Bible by yourself, talking about really talking to yourself probably, but looking at the whole Christian life from only your perspective. There has to be some kind of interaction with other believers who will challenge your beliefs, what you say, your interpretations. Iron sharpens iron so that we can all get to the truth. All right, you can't just be holy by yourself, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, I don't care how hard you try. That's what happened way back in early centuries, second, third, fourth, third especially centuries, where some people would go into the desert to be monks. And Benedict, this man named Benedict eventually said, "Y'all crazy." And he began to set up, he says, nothing but, if you want to separate from the world, but let's set up a monastery where you are interacting with other people because y'all losing it. Okay. Anyway, not getting off point. Okay. And let's remember, thirdly, let's remember that we are ambassadors and that we really are divine royalties, no matter what the world has told you, no matter what, you've heard all your life. You are divine royalty. So let's live as representatives of God's holiness in all areas of our life. And remember, okay, as I'm closing, remember Paul's words and apply them to your holiness, okay? And let me read it to you, okay? And let's reflect on God's nature. Paul said, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 13:11, when I was a child, okay? I spoke as a child. I understood as a child, okay? And I thought as a child. But when I became a man, when I became mature, then I put away childish things. Our holiness has to grow, just as our faith has to grow, just as our love for God has to grow, okay? You don't enter the day, get saved today, and then you got the same holiness 50 years from now. It grows. It grows as we become more and more and more like Jesus. So I ask you this question. I'll leave you with this question. Are you ready to reflect or to show forth or illustrate or be an ambassador of God's kindness and his wisdom and his maturity in your life? Are you ready to have holy maturity? All right, ongoing holy maturity. Then let's go do that. So thank you for joining us this week. And we hope you'll come back next week for our next Wisdom Wednesday message. And if we can help you through prayer or such, then please, the easiest way to reach out to us is through our website. And that's www.ffiministries.com. Again, thank you for joining us, you holy, mature people, and God bless you.